Good afternoon. My name's Brett Blake and I work with LC International, and we bring you this Lunch and Learn today around Livestream Mapping in partnership with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. So over the next hour, we're going to be looking at Livestream Mapping. We're going to be looking at the introduction to the learning pathway, which starts now and continues through to January 2022. We'll start to have a look at how you currently identify with your processes and information flows, and see how value stream mapping may help with that in the future. And then finally, we'll finish the session by discovering how you will use value stream mapping in the future and what the potential opportunities are of how you can continue the journey after today's Lunch and Learn. So for those of you that have just joined the Miro board today in the Lunch and Learn, please feel free to click the link in the Zoom chat, which gives you access to the Miro board. As you can see here, you can add content and post-it notes by selecting a post-it note from the left-hand side, identifying with your colour, and then placing it somewhere on the board. And this is a good way of being able to share your thoughts and ideas to others that are on the call today. So please feel free to have a go at just adding a post-it note to the Miro board, as we'll be using this function a little bit later on for you to share some of your thoughts and ideas around value stream mapping. And again, for those of you that have just joined, to access the post-it note, click the little sticky note on the left-hand side, identify with the colour you'd like to use, and place it somewhere on the board. And once you've done that, you can type your text in there. Excellent. If the post-it note goes to somewhere you don't want it, you can always select it and move it somewhere else. Perfect. Thank you very much. So now that we all know how to use a Miro board today, let me just take you through the learning pathway to start off with. So the learning pathway for value stream mapping is built up of 4 elements. The first element is Lunch and Learn. And today we'll just cover off what the topic is and what it means within lean construction. Following on from this Lunch and Learn, you'll have an opportunity to access the e-learning module linked to value stream mapping on the Supply Chain Sustainability School website. And that e-learning module will take about 30 minutes to complete, and it's a little bit of an assessment at the end that just gives an understanding of whether you've understood the content of the materials in that e-learning. This also counts towards the continued professional development, so the CPD, and there are CPD points available for that. Following on from the e-learning, there'll be an opportunity at the end of today's session to register for the Workshop Initiate. And the Workshop Initiate will take on board what we've covered off today in the Lunch and Learn, but also the e-learning, and allow us to work together to practice that learning and to start to create a value stream map of our own processes. And through the creation of that value stream map, we'll be able to seek out opportunity and improvements and enhancements we can make to our current ways of working, but also how our different process steps, different teams work together. A short time after the Workshop Initiate, we'll come back together again for an hour-and-a-half workshop. And this is your opportunity to feed back the things that you've been working on around value stream mapping, what has worked well, what has not worked so well, but also it's a coaching opportunity between the small team that we will bring back together to say, what can we do differently in the future? So the learning pathway is all about giving you a foundation knowledge, allowing you to explore that foundation knowledge further, put it into action, seek out the improvements, and then have a coaching opportunity at the end to say, how do we further improve what we've been working on? So that's a little bit about the learning pathway. A little bit later on today, I'll give you the option to be able to link into the Workshop Initiate and register for that. So let's have a look now then at value stream mapping. So value stream mapping was brought together a number of years ago by a couple of gentlemen called Mike Rother and John Shook. And they created a book called Learning to See. And value stream mapping is all about learning to see what you do in a slightly different way, allowing others within your teams and within the work that you're involved with to see what you do, how it works, and what impact it has on other people that are going to be taking on work after yourself. So value stream mapping focuses on what we call the 5 principles of lean. The 5 principles of lean are about understanding what we must do to add value to the process or service that we give to our customers. So value is all about what is it that's expected of us in what we do, whether it be at work or some of the interactions that we have outside of work. The value stream element of the 5 principles of lean is about being able to map that out so we can actually see how those processes flow, how they interact with each other, but also identify with opportunities that we can improve further, but also seek out frustrations that are stopping that flow of work. And that brings me to the 3rd principle of lean, flow. What we aim to do with any processes that we have at work is ensure that whatever we do can be passed on to the next step seamlessly. We think about flow as ensuring that if I'm waiting for something to be given to me, I want to ensure that it's given to me correctly so I can continue with my piece of work without having to backtrack. The 4th principle of lean is around pull. And the best way of explaining pull is how supermarkets work. So think about when you go into the supermarket and buy some product, maybe eggs or milk or something like that. Pull is the trigger, the mechanism that allows that supermarket to understand what has been taken so they can then react and replenish what has been removed. And they use a pull system using the barcoding system, for example. And then finally, the 5th principle of lean, and then we'll focus on a little bit later on in today's session, is around how do we have that relentless pursuit of perfection? How do we ensure that everything that we do, we strive to make better next time? And if I just zoom into this example, this is an example of a value stream map, which we'll cover a little bit later on. And you'll start to see on the value stream map, there are a number of different types of post-it notes we've added on there. The yellowy coloured post-it notes across the middle are what we call our process flow. These are the things that we do on a day-by-day basis to ensure that we're delivering a product or a service. The red and the green post-it notes are where we're seeking out opportunities or identifying with frustrations, and they're placed significantly on the value stream map in alignment to where the process is that we're identifying those opportunities and frustrations. And then across the top, you can see some different type of boxes. This is what we call our information flow. These are the systems that we have that are guiding us within our daily workload. They're guiding us on what we need to focus on, what we need to do. These systems could be things like SharePoint, MRP systems. They could be the time and attendance systems that you have. But the information flow is guiding what we need to do, what we need to focus to make sure the process works. So value stream mapping isn't just about capturing information on a page. It's about engaging with people and ensuring those people have an understanding of what they do and then sharing with others across the workload to say, this is how my work interacts with your work. So value stream mapping is about understanding the end-to-end view of what we're working on. So let's take an example around construction. The end-to-end of construction could be from the tender process into design. Then you've got the pre-construction. Then we've probably got the pre-commencement. Then we go into working with our trades and supply chain partners to get the construction working. So whether that be the steel workers, the concrete workers, the M&E, for example, and then the fit out. And then we're going into the handover and the QA checks before we can hand it over to the customer or client. And the value stream map is there to map out the whole process from end to end, from that design, how it handovers and interacts with pre-construction, pre-commencement, how it hands over and interacts with the construction phase, and then finally into the QA and hand over to the customer. So what you can see here on these examples is that whole flow from end to end and all of the challenges that these teams have identified with that they need to focus on to ensure that that value stream offers ultimate value and ensures that they can meet their quality, cost and delivery. Now, what I'd like to do is just ask for yourself, just spend a couple of minutes looking at these questions that I've added here on the board. I'd like you to think about, what do you currently identify, or what do you currently use to identify with your process and information flows within your own work areas and business? What methods do you use to understand where to make improvement? And then finally, how do you ensure that improvements made are having an effect to the overall value stream, the end-to-end? So please feel free just to spend a couple of minutes just sharing with me the responses to these thoughts here. And you can do that by selecting a post-it note, selecting a colour, and adding it to where you'd like to make a comment. As you're adding those comments there, I'll review them and see what sort of comments we've got there. So process maps and flowcharts. So excellent. So a process map and a flowchart are what I call a lower level way of mapping out what we do. And what value stream mapping does is takes those process maps and flowcharts and lifts it up a level so we can see the whole end-to-end of what's happening and how those different processes interact with each other. Swim lane diagrams. They're also excellent ways of mapping out the interactivity between different teams. And what value stream mapping does is it will pull information and detail from these current diagrams that you have, but allows you to see the bigger picture. And what you can do actually is, from a value stream mapping perspective, you can look at this at different levels. You can do what we call a helicopter view, and look at multiple programs or projects together and how the value stream across, say, the supply chain works for them. Or you can dig into the detail and just start to look at single projects to understand how a supply chain partner or a logistics partner would work with just that one level. So there's a good question there. What are core processes and sub-processes? So the value stream map would start to look at those core processes, the things that have to work within those teams to flow, to deliver what's expected, a program or a project, for example. The sub-processes is what we'd potentially seek out through the swim lane diagrams, and the process maps. Or you could take a lower level value stream map to look at those sub-processes separately. For example, if you're a construction site and you have a supply chain that's building off-site manufacturing, some pods, or something that you're bringing into the site complete to be fitted to the construction, you may do a value stream map of the actual manufacturing facility, and then see how that intertwines with the construction to make sure we do have flow. And if we don't have flow, how we can set those triggers to make sure we've got the right things supplied at the right time. So what methods do you use to understand where to make improvement? So somebody's just put on their SIPOC. SIPOC is an excellent starting point. And for those of you that don't know what SIPOC stands for, it's supplier, inputs, process, outputs, and customer. And the idea of a SIPOC is to identify with that process, that value stream in the middle, and then think about what suppliers are inputting into that value stream, what impact will they have on what we're aiming to deliver. And then from a outputs perspective, what is the customer expecting to be delivered to them? Now what we do is we turn that around, and we don't call it SIPOC, we call it COPIS. And the reason we do that is we put the customer at the front and at the heart of those processes. So we turn it from a supplier focus into a customer focus, which allows us to really understand how we deliver that improvement, that benefit to the customer. And then we work with our suppliers to say, how are they going to make that happen? I can see other methods on there, 5 whys and waste analysis. And those techniques we can use once we identify with our main flows of information and process, we can use those techniques to really drill down to say, well, what action can we take? Key performance indicators are key. Having a way of being able to measure our success. And one of the key measures on value streams is what we call our lead time. And we start to understand from that end to end, are we able to deliver on the commitments made? And from that lead time, we start to think about what's impacting and affecting that lead time, what's value adding and what's non-value adding. And our challenge with Livestream Mapping is to seek out what you saw earlier on, those red post-it notes, those red ones are focusing on frustrations and then a non-value added activity. And I'm going to give you a few pointers a little bit later on how to get them out in the open. And then finally, the last question, how do you ensure that improvements made are having an effect on the overall value stream? And again, one of those is that lead time measurement. Are we finding that the actions and the activities that we're working on to improve is actually shortening that lead time? Within the value stream mapping, are we finding that we're closing down those frustrations, which is enabling things to flow, reducing the waiting time we have between processes? We'll tend to find, as we start to work with people in the value stream, we'll start to get to understand how they're impacting the process. Through looking at the value stream, they may reorder some activity or remove some of the duplication that's currently in place. We may find that the information flow between the systems that we have is causing confusion. And by value stream mapping out both the process and information flows, we can really start to understand where the impact is that we have from one part of the process to the other. As a business, we can also think about maturity matrices, doing surveys across each of the different processes to start to think about how they're interacting with each other. I recall working with one organisation where we had a call centre that was dealing with customer concerns and complaints. And we had a processing centre that was actually processing the work. And neither the customer contact centre or the processing centre really understood what each of the teams did. And they never spoke to each other. So what we did is we created a value stream map to show the interactions between the two teams and the customer. And as soon as we created that, those two teams understood the impact that the processes had on customer satisfaction. And they started to create improvement cycles around when the process wasn't working. There was a feedback loop to the customer services centres and let them understand what was going to happen. And as the customer gave feedback of the process to the customer contact centre, they fed back to make improvements around the process. So these are ways we can use via stream mapping. So thank you very much for sharing some of those thoughts there. As always with these Miro boards, a link will be sent out to you after today's session. And you've got access to this board after today's session to reflect back on some of the comments that have been added on there, but also to share with some of the colleagues that you work with so they can benefit from today's session. So when you start to look at your processes, you'll always find there's potentially three versions. There's what you think is actually happening. It may be a standard. It may be what has been designed. But as you start to seek out and do your go, look, see, and look at your value streams, look at the information and process flow across teams, you'll find that what you think is happening isn't the true reality. And you'll be shocked at what waste and what activities have crept in just to keep things going. Thinking when materials haven't been delivered on time, what's the extra work you have to do to get those materials on site? If information wasn't given to you in the right way or the right context, how many times do you have to go back and contact people for requests for more information? And that's where that process of what you think is happening starts to grow arms and legs. But our challenge, and we can use that technique that somebody mentioned earlier on around SIPOC, supplier input, process, output and customer, we can use that thought process to say, okay then, what should the process be? And this is our challenge to move from a current situation to a future situation. But we can only move forward if we understand the true reality of what's happening. So value stream mapping is all about exposing that true reality. So I'd like to identify with you today some key steps in the value stream mapping process. The first thing you have to do is think about the process that you're going to map out and get agreement with the team that that's the process that everybody's going to be looking at. So if it's a procurement process, think about where the start point and end points are for procurement and what that's going to look like as you map it out. If it's a design process, who are the people that are involved with that? And what does that process look like? And step 2 is about identifying with your objectives and scope around what you're mapping out and what you're aiming to achieve from that. Step 3 is around mapping the current state. Now, this is something that could take many days or many weeks to do. And you may have to hold a number of different workshops, whether they be physical workshops with people interacting face to face, or like we're doing today from a virtual space, and maybe using something like Miro to capture your value stream mapping so people can access it at any time. But map the current state. Map everything that's happening, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. Use the current standards you have in place to guide you on, this is what we think's happening, but let's map out what's the reality of what's actually happening. Capture where things are working well, where things are not working well. Capture how long things take. Capture the quality that you're gaining from each one of those process steps. And as you map out the process, you need to do this walk in 2 directions. You need to walk downstream, so downstream from the customer, and start to say, okay then, if I'm a customer, what do I expect from the next process or the last process? And then from that last process, what do they expect from the process that's feeding them? And start to capture your map in that way. The other option is to map it the other way, which is also going from what am I giving to somebody else that they're going to be working on? So as you start to map the process, map it in both directions, upstream and downstream. What am I giving to the next process step? And what does that look like? What's that next process step receiving from me? Because sometimes what you give isn't necessarily what is required when it's received. After you've mapped the process, think about the waste, the things that are not scheduled to be done, the things that don't add any value, the check-in, the asking for more information, the rework. These are things that will not be in your current standard, but it's a true reality. And once you've got that 4th step in place, think about how you're going to map the future state. What is the art of the possible? And your challenge is to move from the current to the future and create that action and implementation plan. And create that with smart objectives. And what I mean by that is what you're working on specific to what you've identified in your objective and scope? Can you measure your success? Is it achievable, what you're working with? And is it relevant in closing down and moving you towards the future? Then finally, is it timely, time-bound? Ensure you're picking an improvement cycle that doesn't take years and years, because you'll just never get there. So value stream mapping is all about the active collaboration of the different teams that are performing the tasks. Ensure you're using the real people who are doing those activities to map out what they do, and not just a team of experts. So I'd like to open up to yourself again as a team on the call today. What's your current situation of value stream mapping within your businesses? And please feel free to share some examples of how you understand your end-to-end processes. Where is it working well for you? And share some examples of how you understand your end-to-end processes where it's not working well for you. And the points that you raise on here will help other people on the call to understand what they need to consider following on from today's session. So I'll just give you a few seconds to add a few thoughts on there. That's a really good comment someone's put on there around Ensure with your value stream mapping that you regularly review those maps to make sure they're still current. Make sure that people are still working to what has been agreed on there if you're moving to a future state. Value stream maps can also be very useful if something changes, if technology changes, or one of your processes has been reviewed and altered to be more efficient. You can see using the value stream map how that will impact and affect other teams and what they need to consider. If you're introducing new products or new services, you may be able to use a value stream map to see how the current teams can interact with those new products and services so that you don't have to continue to change people's roles. It can form part of how they currently work with that new workload that's coming in. Somebody's put on their data collection. New teams need a better way of quickly to document requirements. So you could map out what that looks like as well. Map out the flow of information between different teams so that actions can be taken. So value stream mapping can be used for many different elements. I tend to use value stream mapping more often than not to focus on where waste and non-value-add activities are creeping into the process, and then use the teams to agree with where we need to focus first. You can very quickly identify where there are constraints or what we call bottlenecks in your process when you start looking at the value stream map, especially if you're starting to build it with the detail of timings of activity, for example. So thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts on there. And again, as we go through the next elements, please feel free to reference back what we've had on here and said on here already. So let's have a look at value stream mapping in a little bit more detail. So value stream mapping isn't the same as process mapping. Process mapping is that zoom in, looking into specific processes and activities that you may do as an individual. Value stream mapping is actually that zoom out, and it's understanding that whole journey between what the customer needs to what we do to enable customer satisfaction. Now, you may use certain elements around process mapping to understand the detail behind those processes as they come together. But the value stream map is that end-to-end view. It's an end-to-end view to understand how those different process steps work together to give that ultimate customer satisfaction. When you think about mapping out your value stream map, think about potentially understanding the team that you need to work together on. Maybe sketch out very rough, first of all, what it is you're aiming to achieve. Do that, walk downstream, and then looking from the customer perspective and walking back upstream and thinking around what I'm receiving, is that in the same frame as what's being sent? Or is there extra work where frustrations and waste are creeping in? When you start to create your value stream map, think about who needs to be involved within the process. Involve the customer. Get good feedback from themselves around what is it they're expecting from those processes that you're pulling together. A value stream map, when you start to create it, whether you're using the physical option around post-it notes on brown paper, or the virtual element, maybe using the Miro board like we're using today, think about ensuring that people are fully engaged and they understand that they can put any comments on there. There are no secrets. And by the very nature of using either a virtual or physical post-it note, things can be changed, updated, rewritten to ensure that we've got a real understanding of the current state. And as you start to build this map, I'm going to take you through some steps to help you build it in a more efficient way. So when you start to build your value stream map, always start with the customer in mind. What is the service that we're offering them? What is the product or project that we're delivering to them? And what does that look like? Is it a number of things that we're giving them over a period of time? Is it a one project that has to be delivered in 2 years? And what we're going to be mapping is all of those steps that we go through to enable that to happen. If we were in a factory, for example, and we had an order that was making 10,000 widgets a week, we could map out that that's exactly what the customer wanted, 10,000 widgets a week. And we could actually start to break that down using our value stream map to understand what are the different process steps within that manufacturing facility to make those widgets to deliver to the customer on time and in full. Now, step 2 is about takt time. And takt time, the simplest way of explaining that is the heartbeat of the way you're producing. And the idea within value stream mapping is to understand that heartbeat. So every process works in a similar heartbeat. So as I complete something and pass it on, that next step can also complete it and pass it on. And the idea is we're trying to ensure that that heartbeat remains constant across all processes. And that heartbeat can be managed through resources and process steps that we take to ensure that there's a consistency there. Once you've understood the takt time, think about then mapping out that central flow of the main process steps that's taking you from maybe raw materials through into a finished product that we're serving. Or it may be information that we receive that we deal with to make sure that we're passing the right detail on to the customer. Once we've got those main process steps, we start to think about what's the movement of work between those processes. Does it always flow in one direction? Or are there many back loops or rework loops that we need to think about and deal with? Step 5 is about showing the inventory we have on hand. That could be inventory of information. If you use maybe a queuing system, it could be the inventory that's held within your queuing system, or maybe your inbox of email around what you need to deal with first before you get to the next email that's just been received. Then step 6 is about how do we look at those first 5 steps, the processes, the stagnated work, and think about where are the waste and opportunities to improve. And if you notice, we're looking at opportunities to improve even before we've looked at how long it takes us to do things. Because sometimes, especially when you're working with people, they'll have an understanding of what's working well and what isn't, without even going into the detail of collecting times. So do that opportunity and waste walk before you start going into the detail of collecting timings. Steps 7 through to 9 is about collecting more detail on your map so that you can then make objective decisions around what's happening. And those can then be measured and tracked to show improvement. So if we were to look at our map again, the customer is towards the right-hand side. The main process steps, as we see here, there's 2 floors of main process steps across the middle. The takt time, the rate that we would need to work, is captured just underneath the customer. And that's saying in this example that there's so many pieces need to be produced at a certain time frame. So think about what your heartbeat is that you're aiming to achieve. Then we've got the movement of work, and as we can see here with the thick black lines, this is showing that there's movement going from 2 processes across into a main process. We can also see from the thin black arrows the information flow from people and from systems enabling that process to work. And then finally, the timings and the things that we would measure our current efficiencies on our value stream mapper towards the bottom, captured as a lead time ladder, and also as some of the cycle times and other detail that's identifying with number of people working, potential quality and efficiencies in there as well. So that's a little bit around the value stream mapping and some of the content in there. So going back to step 6, which is identifying waste and opportunities. This is where we can start to think about, once we've mapped our main process flow, how do we then seek out with the teams where the opportunities are to improve? And we can look and use this little diagram here to start thinking about what's adding value and creating flow, what's not adding value and potentially creating waiting time, and what's actually waste, things that we shouldn't even be doing. They shouldn't even have a place in our value stream map, and we need to remove those. And we can use just some very simple waste walks and observation sheets based on our value stream map. We can look at some of the comments in here and think about what are we observing on our site that we've mapped out around transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocess and defect wastes. These are what we call our classic wastes. Or we could focus, if it's more of a surface environment we're working, what's causing delay? What's causing unnecessary movement of our people or information? What's causing us duplication of effort? Where are errors made? Where is the incorrect inventory where people are potentially waiting to be listened to or given the correct service? And then when we use feedback, how often do we just lose that opportunity to improve because we don't act upon the feedback? And then finally, from a service, how often are we asked the same question on a number of occasions because the communication we had was unclear? And these are the things that we start to focus on around the non-value added and waste that we need to remove from our value stream map. And the challenge with our value stream map in this example is to take it from all these numerous steps that we see there and see if we can actually take some of those non-value added steps out, improve the efficiency of where we work. And I've just added, and you can look at these a little bit later on, just some very simple calculations that you may be able to use that actually helps you with understanding how efficient your current processes are and what you need to consider to improve in the future. Is it process step related? Is it the number of resources that we utilize at any given time that we need to focus on to improve? So once you've identified with your current situation, the challenge is to think about what can we do to improve? How do we make a better future state? And this is where we start to work with the teams to say, what can they do differently? How can they use those wastes and opportunities to redesign that value stream to be more efficient and productive? Think about these key questions around what's the current takt time or heartbeat of your process? And how do you want to speed that up? How are you going to continue with creating that flow so we have no waiting time in there? One process seamlessly moves into another process. Think about how you can set triggers up, triggers of when we need to take action, when we need to react, a little bit like supermarkets with the barcoding system. So if you're working with multiple supply chain partners across quite wide locations, how do you put triggers in place so they know when to react and when to deliver their next lot of materials or equipment that's going to be used on site? And think about, what does that value stream map look like when you compare it with the current state? And as you can see in this example, this is the same process. The first one on the left is before the improvement. The one on the right is after the improvement, where we've seen a massive change in the number of steps that we've had to go through. We can see a massive reduction in the amount of information that's been shared between the teams. We've probably removed a lot of duplication. And in this example, I can tell you that there was a distance saved around how much that product moved around the site. On the left, it was moving 45 kilometers around the site before it was turned from raw material into a finished product. On the right on value stream map, it was moving less than 200 meters because we'd understood how to streamline the whole process and remove all of that non-value added waste. And as you start to move from a current state to a future state, think about how you're going to look at that. And I've got a simple acronym there that actually we can use to start to move from current to future. Think about how you eliminate the wastes. Think about how you combine activity, how you rearrange the activity so it's done in a more efficient, productive way. Maybe think about how you simplify tasks. Can we find best practice from within our industry or some of the supply chain partners that we work with. Think about how we standardize activity so we've got a common approach that's repeatable, reliable and capable. And then finally, if at all possible, can we automate the actions so that it cannot be done wrong? And we're using technology to help with that automation. So as you start to think about continuous improvement and moving from a current to future state, just think about setting yourself some principles to work with. What are the principles that you're trying to aim to deliver within your business? Do you want to reduce handovers between one team and another? Do you want to create ownership so people take responsibility and accountability? How can we make things touchless? So actually information is there already without actually being asked for. It's just automatic. How do we improve quality? Not only quality to the customer, but how do we ensure quality internal as well, so that we don't get it wrong, that we have to put it right before we give our finished product or service to the customer. Think about in this day and age now, where we've got skill shortages due to the pandemic, due to the way we've moved out of Europe through Brexit. Think about what skills are we now missing within our expertise, and what do we need to do to actually lift people's skills up, maybe multi-skill in some situations. And then think about how do we take that customer focus, design it into the future, and then enable our leadership to understand the part they play in making it happen. So whenever we look at Livestream Mapping, it really is good to understand as you start to sell this as a way of working within your business, is to understand what the benefits are. Because most people will sometimes see Livestream Mapping as extra work that isn't necessarily going to give you that improvement immediately. So think about what the benefits are that you want to sell within your business to say, give me the opportunity to map what's happening out, what's happening, so other people can take action. And some of the benefits I've got here around, it will identify and help you remove waste. It will help you understand how processes can be more efficient through the removal of those wastes. As my example earlier on between the contact centre and the processing teams, by aligning cross-functional teams, you'll get greater buy-in. They'll understand how they can help each other out and remove some of the duplication of effort. Think about how you can identify on your Livestream map that the way and the order that you work is doing the right things at the right time. Then finally, for me, it's about identifying those constraints and bottlenecks. If you map everything out on a page and understand the cycles that people go through and how the systems interact with those cycles, we can start to see where there's waiting time, where these constraints are that we can deal with. And as we improve one constraint or bottleneck, what you'll find is it pushes the problem somewhere else, and we'll be able to see that on the Livestream map and take action. So Livestream mapping can be used in any industry. From my experience, I've used it in automotive, aerospace. I've used it in construction. I've also used it for the NHS in mapping out patient pathways. I've used it within procurement teams, mapping out how things are ordered, how things are paid for and invoiced. I've used it in timesheets and attendance to understand how do we get the best out of getting information from people, dealing with expenses and holidays and things like that. So wherever there's a process, wherever there are frustrations within the process, wherever there's contact between multiple teams, Livestream mapping can be used to simplify that journey and get people on board to take action. So what I'd like to do now is just hand over to yourself again. And I'd like you to think about what benefits would you be looking for if you were to embark on Livestream mapping. And by the very nature of thinking of this from your perspective, what you can do is use that as your story with the teams that you work with. So please feel free to collect a post-it note, add it onto there, and just type in what you believe your benefits should be and how you're going to sell this story to the teams you work with. One of the ones I always put on there, one of the benefits is it makes life easier. It makes it easy because I know what's happening and I know what the next steps are happening. It allows things to be transparent, so we can all see what's happening at any given time. It's good for customer confidence. Because we can share the Livestream maps with our customers to say, this is how we work. This is how we do business. And actually, when things go wrong, that's okay, because we've got it mapped out to understand the actions that we're going to take to make it better. We've got saves time and effort, reduces time spent, absolutely. But what there may be is an upfront investment to map out the process so that you have an opportunity to save that time in the future. I always ensure when I do value stream mapping exercises, I use the people doing the process itself. And all that does also, it just opens their eyes. So it's all about learning to see. It seems a little bit of a corny expression, but I'm never surprised around how many people, after we've gone through a value stream mapping exercise, say to me, well, I never knew that that's what happened. I only ever did my bit. I didn't know that's where it went afterwards. By the very nature that they've now learned to see, they know what they need to do to ensure that they're not passing on any errors. And if they do make an error, they know what impact it will have elsewhere, and they take action with that there and then. Empowering people by improving awareness of their contributions. Absolutely, that's one key element around the benefits. So thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts there. As we come to the closing part of today's session, what I'd like us to think about now is, how will you use value stream mapping? What will your focus be as you follow this session? Let me just lock that in place. There we are. What will your focus be towards the end of this session? And then what actions will you take first? And use these two areas on this board as a bit of a kickstart, a bit of a reference back to yourself around, what have I understood from this? Where should I focus? And what action am I going to take first? And maybe in 3 or 4 weeks' time, when we come back together again on the workshop Initiate, use this as a point of reference to say, did I take that forward? What do I actually need to do? And use this Maro board as an opportunity to think about the order of events, who to involve, what to consider. Okay. And while you're thinking about those two areas, please feel free, if you've got any questions you'd like answering, just to add any questions in there. And I'll aim to answer some of them now during today's session. If not, any questions you do ask, I will ensure the answers put on there. And when the board is posted out to you all after today's session, you've got the response to the question that you've raised. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes just to have a think about, how will you use value stream mapping? And finally, if you've got any questions you'd like answering. And again, from a familiarisation with value stream mapping, the link or the reference I made to the Learning to See book by Mike Rother and John Shook, that's a really good starting point. And it's written in such a way that it isn't just focused on industry or manufacturing, it's focused on learning to see in any environment. So that's a good one to start with. Also, following on from this session, If there's anything I can support you with, please feel free to reach out, and my details will be given to you at the end of the session on this board. You'll also find, as I mentioned earlier on, some e-learning on the Supply Chain Sustainability School website. And that e-learning will go into a little bit more detail on what we've covered today and potentially give you some thoughts and ideas of how to make it happen. So ensuring new staff fully understand the requirement. Yes, the Livestream map can be used just as a reference to take people through. What are the steps that we go through? How do they link together? But they can also be shown to new starters to understand who's involved with the process. So we've got map all individual processes before linking everything together. I think that's a really good point. But what I would suggest there is think about what you want to map. I wouldn't want you to leave this session and become what I call a team of happy mappers, because we've still got to deliver products, services, our daily workload. So just think about, what are you there to do? Improve performance or be a happy mapper? So think about what mapping looks like within your business, where you need to focus on first. And if you've got multiple processes, probably think about the ones that you're finding or seeing as a challenge at this moment in time, where feedback from the customer is, we need to take action. So let's have a look at some of the questions. Is there any tool that assists with creating VSMs? So there are some apps out there that you can use, but I find some of the apps are quite clunky. And what it does is it restricts the number of people that can use it at any given time. So what I tend to find from a tool-based perspective is brown paper and post-it notes work extremely well if you're in a room together. And then the Miro board we have here, just creating a space, a little bit like the example I gave earlier on at the very start. That was just created on this whiteboard, this Miro board. And we just set out the scope right at the very start around, let's map out the main process. And we use those 9 key steps that I referenced earlier on, just so that people would start to create that information. So there are tools out there, and I'll answer that in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, after the session's finished. Okay. Does VSM differ based on the sector you work in, or principles are the same? I would say the principles are exactly the same. The way you ask questions might be slightly different because of the language and terminology you have between different sectors. But everything you do is all about driving value to that customer. What are they expecting and how are you delivering that value? Whether it be in a service or whether it be actually making physical product. Recommendations to increase knowledge in the Lean Tools VSM or books, training websites. I'll put some on there as well for you after today's session, and that will be shared with you following today's session. So just as we get into the last part of today's session, there's a couple of things I'd like to share with you. First of all, if you found that this was of value and you want to take this any further, we have a Livestream Mapping workshop initiate taking place on the 18th of January 2022. And it's a 3-hour workshop which will explore in more detail how to create a Livestream map and give you some pointers of how to do this in your own work environments, whether it be construction, service, in the office, manufacturing. So please feel free to either click the link here or click the link at the right-hand side of the little screenshot that I've got there as well. That'll take you through to the registration page. But also my colleague from the Supply Chain Sustainability School has also added the link into the Zoom chat. So please feel free to take a copy of that and register early for the workshop initiate. And then the final thing, a little bit of housekeeping from myself, is we continue to look at different topics, different ways of putting information across around these lunch and learns. So what will be really important and useful for myself today is if you wouldn't mind clicking the link that my colleagues put into the Zoom chat and access the feedback form. And the feedback form should take you no more than a few minutes just to complete, to say how you found this session today And there's some spaces on the feedback form for you to be able to add any comments around what you enjoyed, what else you would like to add to make it improved in the future, and any other additional comments. So please feel free straight after this session just to spend a couple of minutes on sharing your feedback with us today. But thank you very much for your time today on this Lunch and Learn around Livestream Mapping, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again on the 18th of January for the workshop where we can come together and actually take some of this thinking and put it into practice. So thank you very much for your time today, and have a great afternoon.